Hello and welcome everybody to ICMDA webinars. I'm Dr. Peter Saunders, the Chief Executive of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association. And today's webinar is amazingly our 300th in the series since we started way back in 2020 in COVID, thinking we were just going to do a half dozen or so. And we've got Andrea Williams back with us again today, talking on the very topical subject of transgenderism and freedom of speech. Andrea is going to explore how transgender ideology and tightening speech rules are reshaping healthcare for Christian clinicians who are seeking to follow Jesus with truth and courage. She's going to examine the Darlington Midwives landmark stand for female-only spaces in hospitals and what it means for dignity, safeguarding, and lawful single-sex provision. She's also going to review the case of senior nurse Jennifer Mell, who was disciplined for speaking truthfully about biological sex, highlighting a reinstatement and the broader regulatory risks. So we've had some recent wins here. Rooted in the Lordship of Christ, Andrea aims to encourage courageous, compassionate care that protects patients, colleagues, and conscience while preserving freedom of expression in clinical settings today. Andrea is the director of the Christian Concern advocacy organisation based in the UK, and also the Christian Legal Centre, which works in tandem with Christian Concern. She's led many high-profile Christian freedom cases and parliamentary campaigns in the United Kingdom and Europe. And through legal advocacy and cultural engagement, she's been at the forefront of defending life, family, and Christian freedoms in the United Kingdom and beyond, really all around the world now. Andrea is a qualified barrister with over 3 decades of experience in law, public policy, and campaigning, and she's also a passionate voice for Christian truth, working tirelessly to see society transformed by the gospel in every sphere, from law and politics to education and healthcare. She is married to Gareth, and they have 4 grown-up children and 1 grandson. Andrea, it's just such a pleasure to have you back here. We've known each other for, I think, probably 30 years, way back when we were both doing student ministry, weren't we, with medics and lawyers, respectively. And it's just a great pleasure to have you back here on ICMDA webinars. So over to you. We look forward to hearing what you have to say and to engaging with you in the Q&A shortly. Thanks.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you, Peter, and I have very much enjoyed knowing you for most of my professional life and working with you. So thank you so much for this amazing opportunity. What a privilege to be with you from all over the world. Doctors, dentists, healthcare professionals from all around the world. It's my great privilege to be with you today and to really look at the challenge that we are facing across the world with regard to what it really means to be human, this notion of transgenderism. So the title I've been given is Transgenderism and Freedom of Speech. And really, the question beneath that for doctors and medics, for healthcare professionals, for dentists, for those that love the Lord Jesus Christ across the world, is what does it mean in your situation always to advocate for the truth that each one of us is made in the image of God? Well, the Christian Concern challenge that we bring to you at ICMDA today is this: where you, in your particular situation in countries all around the world, I'm going to set out what has happened in order for us to get to a place in the United Kingdom whereby within the medical profession, a man is recognized as a woman, even on medical records. And those that might call that out have been punished. And that this is the situation which we have reached, but at every point sought to stand in the gap with regard to creation truth. And as you think about what it is that I present, because I'm going to give you the history of how we got there in the United Kingdom, as you think about that, wherever you are in the world, I want you to think about where your laws stand and how that's impacting your particular situation in the medical profession, in the health care profession where you are, and really to warn you to stand early, to see what it is that's coming, and therefore to stand in the gap where you are for creation truth, for biblical truth. And so my challenge to you is this, that it is vital from the moment that you see it to challenge what is wrong when it attacks the creation order, being made in God's image, male and female, to articulate what is right, that foundational truth that God made us male and female, and then within that situation to be working to building networks that speak truth, to build what is better, what is clear, what is safe for all. So we're here because we love the Lord Jesus Christ and because we love his ways, acknowledging Genesis 1, that we are made in his image, male and female. We too will love, therefore, God's commands, his moral code, as set out in Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make God in your own image. You shall not decide what it is that you might do in order to put something ahead of his truth. The 10 Commandments were enshrined in our law in the United Kingdom within the Magna Carta, dating right back to 1215. And essentially there was this idea rooted in our law that there was a lawgiver, a supreme lawgiver, and that was then reflected in how we made law and how we made law according to truth. However, a massive legal shift came when we moved to a rights-based culture. It's a recent phenomenon because until 1950, the premise upon which English law was founded was on this idea, as I said, dating back to the Magna Carta, of a common law where God was the supreme lawgiver. The legal shift came with the European Convention on Human Rights in 1950, which continued to reaffirm the profound belief in fundamental freedoms, which are the foundation of justice and peace in the world, best maintained on the one hand by an effective political democracy, and on the other hand by a common understanding and observance of the human rights upon which they depend. And that act was then appropriated into our English law by the Human Rights Act of 1998 and then the Equality Act of 2020. But again, this is where I would like you, those of you that are watching and listening today, to see how important this fundamental shift is. Because we moved in this from this notion of there being a lawgiver, a creator, to an idea that there was more a vertical contract, as it were, to this idea of a horizontal contract between one human to another human being. And so this idea then that there were rights which we could make as human beings. So for women, a human rights might become, this is my body, this is my choice, and that overrides the right of the child in my womb. So there becomes a human right to abortion, or it is my human right to exercise my sexual orientation as a homosexual. That becomes something that then stands in conflict with another human right to freedom of expression of religion. So in terms of how we get to a place in law where we can say in law that a man become a woman and a woman can become a man, the way in which we get there is not by a sudden shift. What happens is that we, at different points through our legal history, begin to deny God's truth within the law. We begin to fail to uphold his morality, his standards within the laws that frame that frame the laws that are in our nation. And so the way in which we do that, and I give you here the timeline in our nation in England was that in 1967 we introduced the Abortion Act, which for the first time permitted the possibility of the taking of life in the womb. Until that point, we'd always protected life from the moment of conception to the point of natural death. That same year, we decriminalized homosexual acts in our law under the Sexual Offences Act. And there may well be nations that are listening to this call now where homosexuality remains a criminal offence. So I'm saying that because what I want you to see is what happens within the timeline as per our laws here in England. And then in 1973, when the next thing that we do is we create, with regards to marriage laws, a concept of irretrievable breakdown. Prior to that, in order to divorce, adultery had to be proved. We have the Human Rights Act of 1998. And then in 2003, we begin to have this concept of sexual orientation, which begins to say that there can be no discrimination in the delivery of public services for people that identify as homosexual. In 2004, we have the Gender Recognition Act, where for the first time in United Kingdom law, we allow for the legal recognition of a transsexual's acquired gender. So for the first time, we say in law that a man become a woman and a woman can become a man. So for the first time, we write into the law a legal fiction. Passports can be changed, birth certificates can be changed, and we then criminalize. We say that anybody that reveals the actual birth sex of a transsexual with a Gender Recognition Act is liable to criminal sanction. In 2004, that same year, for the first time, we recognize in English law that same-sex couples have the right to register as civil partners and take all the privileges of marriage. That then, 10 years later, became same-sex marriage. In the midst of all of this, with fertility and reproductive technologies, we have then for the first time also the possibility of, through the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act of 2008, following on from the Act of 1990, the liberalizing of laws around human reproduction. So we have the opening up of surrogacy, the opening up of adoption, the opening up of fostering. And what this then creates is a world in which a human right is also the human right to a family. And so then we have the opening up of adoption and fostering, donor sperm to lesbian couples, surrogate wombs to men or to women-led couples. And all of this becomes defined as family in English law. And all of this becomes recognized. And then according to the Equality Act of 2010, you are not allowed to discriminate with regard to sexual orientation or to gender reassignment. This includes with regard to family models. So there's the wholesale redesign of family as legal construct, of sex, the male and female as a legal construct. And if you do not accept this, or indeed promote it, then you are said to discriminate, and alongside criminal sanctions, that's within the civil law, but criminal sanctions bring open the possibility of hate speech type of laws. You are using hate speech if you speak against this particular new normal, which has been allowed, which has been permitted in the law of the United Kingdom. I've given you this timeline because I hope that you can see that this issue of transgenderism and freedom of speech does not come in isolation in the 2020s. It comes after a long road of allowing particular cultural norms to become, or societal pressures to become embedded in the culture, embedded in soft policy, and then embedded in the law. What it ends up with today is a situation in our country whereby we have in 2020 now permitted for Divorce, Dissolution and Separation Act, which introduces wholesale, no-fault divorce. You can literally divorce people with the click of a few fingers across across the computer screen. And then indeed, we now have very present a battle with regard to conversion therapy imminent in our own parliament, which says that that the way in which people are born, if they're born homosexual, it is dangerous, it is bad therapy, it is criminal to seek to change that particular trait. What does all of this mean? Well, it means that we create marriage and family in our own image. Two men can have children. Men that say women that say they are men asked to have themselves put on on birth certificates as the mother. In this situation here, you will see Hannah. Hannah is the man who is the captain. He became the person that looks like the woman called Hannah in this picture. And then the lady at the bottom, who's an actress, becomes Jake. So this married couple are a couple that have each changed to the opposite sex. They now have 2 children by surrogacy. They are the patrons of a group called Mermaids, which travels the schools of the schools in our country, in the United Kingdom, promoting the concept of transgenderism to children. And so again, you can see that all of what I've just outlined, this is how it all comes together. This is a picture of it. You then have this kind of absurdity in medicine, where you see that on the right, you can see the NHS, that's our National Health Service, trains midwives in trans breastfeeding workshops. So what we now have is women that look like men are being trained in breastfeeding workshops. Or you have situations whereby men have children placed on them. Perhaps if they've had a child by surrogacy, they are the ones that are in the birthing room, and they have the children put onto their chests in order to be close to the child. But this is the kind of information that you get from the trans breastfeeding workshops. And this trans men's and non-binary pregnancy stories, a journey, deserve to be heard and celebrated. Now, bear in mind that this is where we get to when we deny reality in our law, and it comes in incremental stages. And then by our Equality Act of 2010, all of this is entirely protected in law. And what happens is that the protected characteristics are all given equal status. So you cannot be discriminated in law by reason of age, by reason of disability, by reason of gender reassignment, by reason of your marriage and civil partnership. That's male-female marriage, or man-man marriage, or woman-woman marriage, or civil partnership, and then families within that unit. So a man and a woman and a woman, a man and a man with children, either naturally or by way of surrogacy or by way of donor sperm or fostering or adoption. All of those family units are equivalent, and you cannot discriminate against them. religion and belief is also in there. So Christian faith is also in there. Sex, that's male or female, sexual orientation, all these things are treated as equivalent. But of course, the truth is, with regard to this, is that many of them are mutually exclusive. And what we found in my long history of litigating cases around the Equality Act is that religion or belief is not understood as something that is innate and where there is a hierarchy of rights, that is something that becomes is lower in the hierarchy of rights, being viewed as something that you can often leave at the door, rather than sexual orientation, for instance, or gender reassignment, which is said to be who the person really is, innate in the person. And gender reassignment is also, as I've said, protected, and it's defined in the Equality Act as a person who has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment if that person is proposing to is undergoing, or has undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning the person's sex by changing physiological or other attributes of sex. This is a very wide open definition. Essentially, if a person is saying that they're going to change sex, or is in some kind of process, perhaps even just cutting their hair short or wearing clothes of the opposite sex, then they claim that they have gender reassignment protection. And this dates right back to 2010. So I hope that what I have done now is illustrate for you the confusion that you get in that is then enshrined in the law. So the political and cultural chaos and the legal fictions become enshrined and protected in law. And these were our prime ministers under whose watch this law became deeply embedded in our nation. So they were, first of all, socialist Labour prime ministers under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. But it was Conservative prime ministers, David Cameron and Boris Johnson, that really embedded this into our society. So again, what I'm seeking to warn you about in your nations across the world is that it was Conservative politicians who stopped being conservative, who promoted a socially liberal agenda. And then what also happens is that those policies get filtered into the healthcare profession, and you then have at the top in management positions across healthcare in our country and in the civil service in our country, in the healthcare civil service that supports the frontline workers, which I know many of you will be. This ideology gets rooted into the hospitals, into the training, into the education systems for medicine. This is what happened in the United Kingdom. It is what will happen in your nations unless you see this coming. Some of you will be there already. Unless you see this coming and ensure that at that point you challenge what's wrong, you articulate what's right, and you build the best place for the place that you're in. And then it also comes with our judges, who then say religion essentially is removed from the business of judges. The court should not try to be the guardians of morality because there's no longer one definition of right and wrong. Beliefs about matters such as sex outside of marriage or homosexuality, held by the majority in the 1960s, are as distant to modern Britons as ancient civilizations such as Nineveh or Babylon. So you have the legal profession leaving behind true morality, leaving behind Christian truth. We also have the church itself denying this truth. So you have the former Archbishop of Canterbury endorsing same-sex relationships very early in his tenure, saying they should be supported with as much dignity and the same legal effect as marriage. And this was in 2011. But then then you move on, and within 4 years, you have an evangelical bishop in the Church of England publishing Church of England guidance for services in the churches to help transgender people mark their transition. So you have the church, so the church stops being the church, and you have this promotion of the trans ideology up and down our nation, lighting up our cathedrals. And then this happens and moves into the education department and into the and to the healthcare departments, where they embedded have this promotion of their ideology. And so within the schools, you then begin to see in the curriculum for very young children, transgenderism being promoted, the princess boy who likes to change clothes and he loves to wear ballet leotards and to dance with his friend, and honeysuckle dresses made of lilacs and roses and honeysuckles. So all of this then gets promoted within our schools. To give you an example of government promoted, the government promotion of this ideology, I want to play a few seconds of Ellie Barnes, who, with a group called Educate and Celebrate.
Hi, I'm Ellie Barnes and I am CEO of Educate and Celebrate, and we are a charity that transforms schools and organisations into LGBT friendly places. So predominantly we are training teachers because we want our teachers to be really confident in the language of gender identity and sexual orientation. So they are speaking the same language as our young people.
Diversity and all, it starts with education. I think, tolerance and LGBTQI issues all should start with education. Companies like this are super important for going in and teaching that and having dialogues, getting people to talk about it. Because there's a lot of things going on in school that I think are kind of ignored, and people like Ellie go in and bring that up, and it's a safe space all of a sudden for any children that are having issues to speak about it.
The whole concept of Educate and Celebrate is to treat everyone equally and fairly. And really the bottom line is to completely smash heteronormativity. That's what we want to do.
So to completely smash heteronormativity, that's Ellie Barnes, who's been everywhere in Educate and Celebrate for a number of years. This is the Educate and Celebrate patron, who in fact has recently been jailed for hundreds of offences against minors. He was somebody that was the promoter and instigator within the Surrey Council. So again, across all councils and local authority bodies in a particular area of the United Kingdom. Again, he was at the heart of this movement. And I'm highlighting this because one of the early cases with regard to transgenderism was a school chaplain called Bernard Randall. He taught a Church of England, it was in a Church of England school. He preached a sermon saying that children did not have to accept LGBT trans ideology. And for that, he was dismissed, reported to the anti-terrorism squad, and said that he was unfit to teach. He was then also had his license removed by the church and has been declared a safeguarding risk to children. Meet him.
I never ever thought that giving a sermon would lead to me being dismissed and reported for prevent and safeguarding and treated in such a way. It was just so mind-blowing. I was thinking, I'm never going to work again because I've been accused of being a terrorist. This is the sermon I gave in June 2018. But remember that religious belief is just as protected in law as sexual orientation, and no one has the right to discriminate against you or be abusive towards you. I couldn't comprehend how I'd done anything so wrong that I needed to be suspended. Ruffled a few feathers, maybe, but then as a Christian minister, sometimes that's your job. No one should be discriminated against simply for who he or she is. There was not a word of violence. I wasn't stirring up anything except respect. When ideologies compete, we should not descend into abuse. We should respect the beliefs of others.
So there you've met him. And here were parents, this is Nigel and Sally Rowe. These were parents where children were transitioning in their classroom. 6-year-olds were transitioning in their children's classroom. When they saw, this was in 2016, when they sought to bring this again was in a Church of England school. When they sought to bring this to the attention of the head teacher, the local authority, the head teacher, and the Church of England diocese that ran the school all came against them. And they ended up removing their children from the school. They were accused of hate speech. But as a result of this situation, and the Christian Legal Centre that I run brought a judicial review in order to look at the guidance for schools and for socially transitioning children in schools as young as 6. We, as a result of that case, were able to get, in the end, that guidance looked at again by the government. In the meantime, there have been teachers that can't be identified who have lost their jobs and been told they have safeguarding risks because they're concerned or they refuse to accept that a child that's transitioning in the classroom, that is in the best interests of the child. So there are Nigel and Sally Rowe. Similarly, Christy Higgs was a mother whose children were being subjected to this. She sought to raise concerns about it on her Facebook. She was then reported by a friend to the head mistress of the school where she worked as a pastoral worker. She was dismissed for gross misconduct. Her case took 6 years, but we actually won a most amazing victory in this particular case, because in the Court of Appeal in our country, it was said that in Facebook posts, words mean what they say they mean and not what people think they mean. And so as a result of this, there is now the freedom in our country to continue to speak the truth around this issue without fear of being punished. And here we are at the Court of Appeal after the win in that particular case. Kira Bell opened up the situation around the Tavistock clinic, where she had been transitioned from female to male early. She had a double mastectomy, and the great harm that was caused to her as a result of that. And that has also helped to shift the public narrative with regard to this. And again, this is what I wanted to say to you. What has been happening is that doctors have been giving puberty suppressants and early transitioning teenage people. And I think this is, again, something that you as medics and healthcare workers across the globe need to be looking at and speaking into, getting into as many places, onto as many boards to ensure that these things do not happen. And Maya Forstater was another seminal case in our nation where as a result of her position, it was that men cannot transition to be women. That was deemed to be a philosophical, and for the purposes of the Equality Act, a belief that was worthy, a philosophical belief, not a religious belief, but a philosophical belief that was worthy of protection in a democratic society. So again, that was an important win. And I'm saying this because all of these things are precedent setting for you around the world in terms of making this case. And of course, we as Christians make the case that it is our Christian belief that men cannot become women and women cannot become men. One of our early cases was Dr. David Makareth, and I want to now play his video for you to see what happened to him.
Nobody has ever told me that it was wrong to use pronouns according to biological sex. We were told that in the writing of our reports on clients who came to the Department for Work and Pensions, we must write down in the report any pronoun that that person requested, regardless of their biological sex. For thousands of years, sex has been related to our anatomy, and now suddenly it's related to something else. And if we believe the transgender movement, anatomy isn't even important anymore.
If this is his religious beliefs, then he should not be in the field, and he was right to lose his job.
I mean, how does genealogy continue? How do records be kept when
We're
someone...
talking about gender identity, we're not talking about biological sex.
Gender and sex are the same.
They're not the same.
It shouldn't even be up for discussion. You can't change sex just by having surgery or hormones. It's not possible. Is it really true that I am no longer fit to practice medicine because I believe that a person cannot change sex? Is transgenderism as an ideology underpinning everything, all our medical practice, all our nursing practice, and everything that we seek to do?
And with regard to that particular case, he was fired from that job for his refusal to use transgender pronouns. But that was again what happened as a result of standing firm in that particular case. We've gone on to run a number of other cases. There was a very important case. This was not our case, but a 4 Women Scotland case, in which where the Scottish Parliament had passed a Gender Representation on Public Orders Act, which aimed to increase female representation on public boards. And the dispute came when the guidance was issued alongside the Act, which stated that the definition of woman included transgender women who held a full gender recognition certificate. This was challenged by a group of feminists, and in a seminal judgment in April of 2025, it was held that, for the purposes of the Equality Act, the protected characteristic of sex refers to biological sex, and that even if there was the possession of a gender recognition certificate, that does not alter the meaning of male and female sex within the Equality Act. So this is hugely important in terms of defining truth. You cannot, even with a certificate, change the meaning of sex. Now, despite that ruling, and this is what I want to say, because the truth is that the law is downstream of culture. And if what you have in your medical institutions, in your hospitals, in your general practices, if what you have is a culture and policies that promote the notion of transgenderism or anti-discrimination with regard to gender, then what you end up with is a lot of policies promoting and protecting this particular ideology. So despite that ruling, this is what happened in the case of the Darlington nurses, where a man who looked absolutely like a man was entering a women's changing space and he was in his boxer shorts. He looked like a man, and he was staying there for a long time looking at the women. Here are the nurses. Meet the nurses.
It just makes me feel on edge. You come into work, you're scanning the changing room before you start to undress. It's just uncomfortable, very uncomfortable.
It's disgraceful that nurses are ending up in tears prior to their shift. I mean, we are there to be an emotional support for our patients who are about to undergo surgery. And it's very difficult to do that if you're in a state of distress from having to change in front of a male.
We don't have any issue with trans people. We just want a safe space for us, a female-only space for us to get changed.
Now I know the trust policy. Anybody can be
well,
in there.
Well, that's the problem.
You know, anyone who can identify as female can use that changing room.
I don't want to get changed in front of a biological man, and I don't want to see him getting changed neither. That's not what I want to see when I come into work.
And we're just wanting to talk about this and raise this issue so that women are aware that there may be policies in their workplace, particularly in the NHS. We want other nurses to be aware of what their transgender policy is.
So the truth with regard to the Darlington nurses was that case had been going on for a year prior to the Supreme Court judgment. Even when the Supreme Court judgment came in, the trust did not yield. The trust managers had never been down to the where the nurses' changing room was. They offered them as a separate changing room, literally an office that came out onto a main corridor of the hospital. And the person the man that identified as a woman was permitted to continue to change in the female changing rooms, despite taking it to the highest authorities, to the Minister for Health, and despite the Minister of Health sending an envoy to the hospital. This is shortly after April of last year. No changes were made. The hospital continued to dig in despite the 4 Women Scotland judgment. The judgment then we then got when we ran this case was that the complaints of harassment relating to sex and gender are well founded, and that the trust had engaged in unwanted conduct related to sex and gender reassignment, which had the effect of violating the dignity of the claimants and creating for the claimants a hostile, humiliating and degrading environment. Also, that the trust had engaged in unwanted conduct related to sex and gender reassignment, which had the effect of creating for the claimants a hostile and intimidating environment. Now, despite this judgment that was given, a seminal judgment that was given in January, the trust have continued to dig in. So we have a win. But what they are wanting to do on the ground is that now, even despite that, they're wanting to say that the issue remains very complex. They have a duty not to discriminate against their transgender colleagues, that they have said that they will make single-sex spaces available, but they continue to be very reticent with regard to settling the nurse's case with regard to damages and so on, that the nurses are now owed, and also wanting to continue to keep the door open to transgender protection within the hospital space. Of course, we need to treat people with compassion and respect, but there's been a massive cultural digging in despite these seminal wins. Despite a Supreme Court judgment, despite a Darlington nurses win, there is a reality in our nation and within the medical profession generally, and recently there have been freedom of information requests that have shown that across this country there are 100 hospital trusts that are not complying with the 4 Women Scotland judgment. So we have been across the world, taking the story of the Darlington nurses to across the world. Jennifer Melee was looking after a prisoner patient who was a convicted paedophile who came in shackled in 2024 to the Epsom and St Helier Trust, and she referred to him by his chosen name. She was looking after him. It was a urological condition that he had, and she was speaking about him in the corridor next door to the consultant. The patient overheard that she referred to him as a man. He came out of his bed, he lunged at her, he called her racist abuse, he called her the N-word, and despite that happening, and despite her, what happened then was that she calmed down the whole situation, and she returned everything to security and to safety. It was on her way home after the shift in the morning that she was then called by the trust, asked not to come in, and an accusation had been made of her of discriminating on the grounds of gender. And she was then suspended for gross misconduct. We managed to get her reinstated, but her license, she was also reported for investigation with regard to her license. And the Darlington nurses are also still under investigation for their fitness to practice as a result of the stand that they have made. Jennifer too, despite which we actually got Jennifer returned to her job, to Epsom and St Helier Trust. But despite that, their licenses are under investigation by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. And here we have the nursing, we have the Nursing and Midwifery Council flying the progressive flag. This is actually now close to our offices that you can see. So you can see that the regulatory bodies have been captured by the ideology. So despite wins, and we thank God for these great wins for standing in the gap, and that we have made the law clear. But even when law is clear, and bear in mind here, with David Macarith, Bernard Randall, Christy Higgs, the Rose, all of these people, we make that we can lose in the law and then win. We have now made the law as clear as can be, men and men, women and women. But despite that, we still have this cultural shift where the nurses' licenses are still under threat because the regulatory body is ideologically captured. The civil service is ideologically captured. The management bodies are ideologically captured. And the law isn't enough to stop yet. And that's why we have to keep on breaking through. So we have to keep on challenging what is wrong, articulating what's right, and building what is better. And I hope that what I've done here for you all in presenting this timeline is to help you wherever you are in the world to have a picture of where you might be on that timeline, and to ensure that you stand strong, that you stand firm, in order to ensure that you don't get to even where we have got to. Because even when we're winning the ground back, that's still not clear. God bless you all.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. And I don't know where you're listening to this broadcast from, but I know there are people from probably 50 different countries around the world. And it was just fascinating looking at the emojis going up the screen, just expressing absolute disbelief about what's been happening in the UK. And you've told the story really well in terms of the gradual legal changes that there were over a long period of time, really going back over a century or so, but much more in the last 20 or 30 years, to these ridiculous sort of situations that we are now finding ourselves in as well now. And I was struck by the comment of the Darlington nurses, Andrea, in that quote where she says, "We don't have an issue with trans people. We just want a safe space to work in." And it seems that giving these so-called freedoms has actually had the effect of undermining the very reasonable freedoms of others. It hasn't just been live and let live. It's actually led to a situation where many ordinary people are being discriminated against. And I wanted to ask you, do you think this has just happened passively as a result of culture, or do you think there is a real move to try and bring about this situation where Christians are going to be increasingly marginalized from normal jobs?
Well, let me say, you saw those lovely nurses and the Darlington nurses. Originally, there were over 150 nurses that came together to say no to this.
Yeah.
And then there were 80.
Yeah.
And then there were 30. And then there were 8. And then there were 7. And so it's extraordinary that it takes real courage to stand. And all they were asking for was a safe space to change.
Yeah.
And what I want to say to us as Christians is this, because the point I was also making is that, the conservative political class stopped being conservative. They said, we believe that you can change your sex. We believe in gay marriage. We believe in the remodeling of family. But the church also stopped being the church, stopped being the prophetic witness, stopped believing in Genesis 1. I mean, even the believing church just went quiet. And a progressive church, a church that was apostate in a sense, and our national church wasn't clear. But then what happens is in this debate, we at Christian Concern, the Christian Legal Centre, we've been here from the beginning. After same-sex marriage comes immediately, and I didn't see this, but comes immediately the onslaught of transgenderism and the promotion of transgenderism. But what has happened is that, so immediately for the last 12 years, we've been at the forefront of taking the cases and speaking about this. But the people that now have the microphone for the commentary are the gender critical feminists.
Well,
because it was them that said, no, I'm a woman. I don't want, a man can't become a woman. And I want to feel, that they started saying, we want to feel safe. We don't want them here. Now, of course, I'm pleased that they're in the conversation, but I am sad. I am also sad that what people aren't hearing as the main critique in some ways in the culture is you're made in God's image, male and female. That this is about the flourishing of men and women. That in a sense, everybody doesn't mind the gender critical feminists be taking the microphone for commentary in our secular space. But the Christian contending becomes, again, the more controversial thing. And so that's why we have to articulate. That's why we as Christians have to stay in the public conversation and keep on articulating the truths.
Mm. Now, I think back to, thinking back to the Same-Sex Couples Act of 2014, and then, as you say, within 2 or 3 years of that, it seemed the whole world had gone mad, at least in the UK, over the transgender thing. And it seemed like we were on a hiding to nothing, and that Christians were really the only ones speaking up against it and urging caution. But then over the last few years or so, and I think this has been also underlined by your victories in the Jennifer Malley case and in the Darlington nurses case, there seems to have been a real turning of the tide. And we've had a change, at least in public opinion, if not in the institutions. What do you think has been the reason for that? Because public opinion hasn't changed on other things like abortion or same-sex marriage, but it really seems to have been changing on transgender. What do you think's been the key to that change?
I think that it is truly the unraveling. What you really have is truth turned on its. You have truth so turned on its head, and at one point we seemed even to be accepting. We seem to be even accepting that in our nation. But I think it's when you see the absolute destruction of culture that there are then people that begin to find their voice. All kinds of people that begin to find their voice, which I think in the United Kingdom is why we suddenly have what we couldn't have imagined before, which is probably the obliteration of our two-party political system and a public, a sort of a popular uprisings. More and more voices in saying what has gone on here, but we have a de-Christianized people. And so for the church, for the Christians, there's a very big job to do in terms of re-evangelizing. We need these movements that are saying what's happened to truth. We're very sad here. A man can't become a woman, and so on and so forth. And why? And who actually hate the whole where the sexual libertarian has taken them all, the damage to the children and so on. Young people saying this is all false. Saying it hasn't worked.
It's almost like a kind of Emperor's New Clothes phenomenon, isn't it? Where suddenly one ordinary person, one little boy points out the problem, and then everyone finds the courage to say what they've always felt. But I wanted to ask you also about this whole thing of institutional capture, which you talked about, because it seems as though there has been a real turning of the tide in public opinion, and also some very sensible court judgments recently.
Yes.
But nonetheless, when we look at the institutions, and we're talking about the British Medical Association, the Nurses and Midwifery Council, the General Medical Council, NHS Trust, and of course the church themselves in many quarters, why do you think institutions are so reluctant to change their position on this issue, even when public opinion is starting to move strongly in the opposite direction?
Well, I think a whole industry is being built on it. They really believe that. They really believe it. It is a religion. It is like a religion. And so the people that are in those positions, really, if you have been in the Darlington nurses case and heard the managers, and none of them have been down to the ward to literally to take a look and solve it. And they all said that the decision making was further down the tree or with another person. It was the most extraordinary thing. These managers, 3 of them, all on well over 6-figure salaries, had never met the nurses, had never been down to the ward, and were always passing on the problem to somebody else. So there's a whole industry here. And so that's why I think I'm saying to those across the world that are on this call, take up those positions within regulatory bodies, beyond the local councils, beyond the boards, so that you're maintaining Christian integrity in your institutions. I hope, Peter, that they will, that if we keep on making the noise, that these institutions will also fall. So, for instance, with the nurses, they're all still subject to investigation despite winning their cases as to whether or not they're fit to practice. And if the Nursing and Midwifery Council chooses to bring cases against these amazing nurses, you glimpsed them on the screen there, then the reality will be, I honestly believe that the country will be up in arms, or half the country will be up in arms, and there will be enormous pressure on these bodies that are just not used to that kind of scrutiny. It's a little bit like what we're doing is we're shedding light. It's all been happening behind closed doors, and now we are shedding light on what is happening, on what they are doing, punishing these amazing nurses. And also, remember, these nurses have now been under investigation for some of them nearly 3 years.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's amazing what's been achieved and what you and others have done by just telling the stories and bringing it into the public domain, but then also being willing to take on the cases in the courts, and now to the stage where you're starting to win some very significant cases to uphold common sense, if you like, and legal precedent. And but I wanted to ask you why. This is another question that's come in through from those listening. In spite of these legal judgments, many hospitals, as you say, are still failing to comply. Why is this, do you think? And how can they get away with doing this, given that the law is so clear?
They're very sore losers. They're very bad losers. And even in the judgments, and even in the Equality and Human Rights Commission policy guidance, there is, and even in the For Women Scotland Supreme Court judgment, there is a bending over backwards to say we must not discriminate against a trans person, and to be very gentle with the trans person. And of course, we want to love the trans person into wholeness, but that's the truth of where the judgment and the policy framework still is. And so then what the people that are where there is ideological capture, they use those fig leaves to say it's still unclear. And we still have to protect, and we still have to promote. And yes, that was said, but it's a very difficult situation. It's a very complex situation. Of course, male and female isn't complex at all, but everything is called something that's very complex. So they are, I can honestly say, they have not, the Darlington nurses, no one has spoken to them about their case. No one in the management, no one has, their colleagues have been ordered to be quiet. No one's allowed to speak about it. They've not been offered counselling, let's say, or a return to, well, they were at work, but just help in work.
Good.
So no one has done those things for them. They have not, the trust hasn't just said, we're going to give you a big public apology, pay your financial damages and be done with it. That's not what's happened in this case.
Mm-hmm.
At every point. Yeah.
But we've sadly, we could go on talking about this because there's a lot more. Sadly, we have run out of time. But I just wanted to ask you finally, you've got an audience here of Christian doctors and dentists all around the world. Many of them will be horrified by what's happening in the UK, but are noticing how it happened and how the failure to react against it made things worse, exacerbated it. But what would you say to Christian doctors and dentists in other cultural and political contexts around the world? What would be your clarion call to them on the basis of the lessons we've learned here in the UK?
That you carry Christ's truth. You are light in your nations, your life in your nations, to advocate for his truth fearlessly. And do not have absolute courage. Do not flinch. And as a result of what you have seen, understand that this is where it goes. You can't say that you haven't been told. And how important it is to stand at the first moment when you see God's truth being undermined in your nation, in your institution, and to speak the truth with clarity and with courage, because this is about bringing gospel freedom, gospel truth, light and life to your hospitals, to your healthcare systems, to your nation. It's about the gospelization, the evangelization of the whole of life. It's about the whole gospel. It's about bringing God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. It's about the whole view of the gospel.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and thanks so much to you and your team for so many years of faithfulness in this difficult area, and your willingness to stand up and to speak, but also to be a voice on behalf of the voiceless as well, and those who are being marginalized by all these processes. And keep doing this stuff. You can book for webinars going forward. Do make use of the big archive we've got now of 300 webinars that you can use again in your small groups and or individually or in your national movements. And we look forward to seeing you again soon on ICMDA webinars. May the Lord bless you. Thank you.